The Story of Yakov Stern. Chapter 1. Robinson's under contract. The end of summer, and the weather is like ours in Arkhangelsk, although we are 13 degrees south. Standing on the upper deck near the lowered ladder, the radio telegraph operator of the steamer Neptune, Yakov Stern, shivered, feeling the dank dampness of the famous London fog seeping under a warm CP jacket. Yes, of course, the most correct thing in such weather is to go down to the cabin as passengers and crew members off duty do, or sit in the radio room and listen to the broadcast. But now it's not up to that. The soul is not in place. After all, they got up to load at one of the berths at the back of the Port of London in the morning, and now it's almost noon. And as the XO explained, what is happening does not look like a normal delay due to paperwork, especially considering that a police post appeared on the pier shortly after the captain left for shore. Why would it be? Because everything seems to be quiet, and all they need is to load up and set a direct course for Haifa in the Promised Land. Or maybe the police are not after their soul. Well, if so. In general, this is the most unpleasant occupation to change the country for the third time in my life. Russia, Germany, and now the mandated British territory of Palestine. Although, to be honest, he remembers little about Russia and Arkhangelsk, where he was born and grew up until the age of 5. More according to the stories of the parents. After all, since the distant 1919, when the ensign of the medical service of the Russian Imperial Army, Joseph Stern, literally miraculously took his family out of civil war-torn Russia on one of the last British military transports, almost a decade and a half has passed. So, for the most part, it's not about him in Arkhangelsk. He is more of a Hamburgian than an archangel. But anyway, life in the new homeland in Germany, where they settled as bearers of the German Jewish surname, was generally not bad, despite the fact that they had to live in a country that had lost the war. But doctors, and especially those with extensive experience in military field medicine, are needed everywhere, and therefore they did not suffer. Everything changed in 1933, when the NSDAP, that is, the National Socialist Workers' Party, won the next Reichstag elections. And then it started. Restrictions concerning Jews came down like a cornucopia. Moreover, in comparison with the Russian Empire, where restrictions were on the religious component and the baptized Jew became more or less free, here the main criterion was not religion, but nationality, regardless of whether the person was a Jew, a Christian, or even an atheist. If there is Jewish blood, it means not a German and not a person at all, but a second-class being, an Untermensch. And the consequences were not long in coming. Yakov felt impotent rage begin to boil inside. That's right. They didn't give me a year to finish my studies at the university. They kicked me out, and from the flying club too. But at least it's easier here, 200 hours of flight time and that's it. They will not go anywhere, as well as the knowledge of radio engineering. But who needs a half-educated geologist in Palestine? My father said, "Son, study to be a doctor. You can always feed yourself. People were sick, they are sick and they will be sick. And rocks and fossils, so it's in my free time. Or a doctor on a geological expedition, combining the useful with the pleasant. But we have something, and we don't want to lose it, because it's been more than 2 hours, and the captain is still gone." And the feeling of anxiety does not let go, as it did 2 months ago when their future father-in-law, the long-distance sailing Captain Carl Fishman, or simply Uncle Carl, came to them quite unexpectedly and almost from the threshold declared, "We need to leave Germany and the sooner the better." What was said was so unexpected that the parents literally fell into a stupor, and Uncle Carl, without waiting for any response, continued pouring out his soul with sailor directness. "Here, Azef, a big trouble happened to me." He looked at his father intently, as if looking for moral support from him, not only as a future relative, but also as a person who also went through the war, albeit on the other side. "I met my former colleague at the port today. We fought together. He turns out to be back in the Kriegsmarine fleet. I wish I hadn't. I was glad to see him. I thought we'd sit in a tavern and remember Jutland, but he didn't even give me his hand. He looked at nothing and said that it was not appropriate for him to give a hand to a pure-blooded Aryan to some kind of non-commissioned officer. But if it hadn't been for me, the fish would have gnawed it long ago. That's what I told him, and I also reminded him about the cross for Jutland. And he replied to me that serving the Aryans for the Untermensch is a sacred duty determined by nature itself. And I can even cast a bullet from the cross and she will shoot herself if I don't like everything that is happening in Germany." That was the end of it. "Isn't that a pig?" "Like a pig," my father agreed. "But Carl, because of one incident, you never know how many ungrateful pigs there are in the world. And to drop everything like that at once. It wasn't because of one incident that my mother intervened in the conversation. Don't you read the newspapers? Or did you forget that Yasha is no longer studying at our university, and not because he is a slacker or a fool of the King of Heaven, but because Yes, I did not forget. My father waved me off and I also read the newspapers. But I still haven't forgotten how and with what we arrived here. And I have to move again, and I'm far from 25 or even 30 anymore, so that I can work 2 shifts at the clinic like a bull. And this twitchy neurotic can't always be a Reich Chancellor. Maybe it will do? Well, remember Russia, where Jews were not smeared with honey for us either and lived nothing. It won't do as F won't do, Uncle Carl interrupted his father's monologue. After all, when I met this ungrateful pig, I found myself in the port for no official reason. You know I'm on vacation. I saw off another colleague of mine. To Argentina. Not at all. He joined the political police after the war. Since the 33rd year in the Gestapo. My father was amazed at the Gestapo. Carl didn't know you had such connections. I don't have any connections in the Gestapo, Uncle Carl paused. He came out to me himself, and before that we hadn't seen each other for 15 years. I was even very surprised at first when I heard about his move to Argentina. Why would a man with such a position and status suddenly seek happiness in emigration to foreign lands? And he told me this, the hair stood on end. In general, in short, Izef, everything that is happening now will not end with a simple glass breaking. And even your Russian Jewish pogroms will seem like child's play. They decided to put us all under the knife. And the solution is from the very top. And it doesn't matter who you are, an Orthodox Jew or like me, whose ancestors were baptized 200 years ago and who is already more German than a Jew who remembers God only when it is very stormy. They won't take anything into account. The final solution to the Jewish question. That's what he told me. Well, since he is a pure-blooded German, and now also an Aryan, he categorically does not want to take part in anything like this. He decided to move overseas to Argentina away from here and advised me the same. And that I would warn others whom I know about everything. If they stay, they will die. That's the kind of news I have. Do not reduce, do not add. Yes, Carl really can't reduce it, his father agreed, and then sighed heavily and said how he cut it off. We're leaving. The Gestapo is serious. With this, the issue of leaving Germany was resolved irrevocably and definitively. It only remained to choose a new country of residence, but they decided on this quite quickly, stopping at Palestine since no one is particularly waiting for refugees from Germany overseas, especially in light of the economic crisis raging in the North American United States, and it was pointless to move to one of the European countries neighboring Germany, since there was no guarantee that the Nazi anti-Semitic wave will not reach there in the near future. And Palestine, even though it is a mandatory British territory, is still the historical homeland of all Jews. The promised land given by God to the people of Israel. There's nowhere else to run. 2 months have passed since that memorable conversation, during which 2 very remarkable events happened. Firstly, Uncle Carl's daughter, née Gretchen Fishman, became Greta Stern, and secondly, a cargo and passenger steamer under the English flag anchored in the port of Hamburg, but with a German team hired by Captain Carl Fishman, which included a ship's doctor and radio telegraphist Joseph and Jacob Stern, father and son. The idea to go to a new place of residence not as ordinary passengers, but on their own chartered vessel arose purely by chance when my father noticed that among their future fellow travelers there were so many sailors that at least open a shipping company on the Hamburg-Palestine line. Listen, Izef, and this is a thought, Uncle Carl immediately caught fire with the idea. True, we are still far from a shipping company, but there are quite enough people for one full-fledged crew. And you can hire a steamer in England. I have connections among English ship owners. Moreover, Palestine is a mandatory British territory. It is beneficial to them, and he also thought for a second. And if everything works out, I'll take you both into the carriage. A radio telegrapher and a doctor. At least for one flight. Earn normal money, and then you know yourself, then after the exchange we have nothing less than a cat cried. It was simply stupid to refuse the opportunity to earn hard currency in the form of British pounds in the current situation, and therefore they agreed without hesitation. Moreover, the steamer is not a sailboat, you will not have to climb the masts, and the captain is considered his own. If anything, he will tell you. And then everything went like clockwork. More than successful negotiations with ship owners on the repair of a small but still decent-sized cargo and passenger steamer bearing the proud name of the god of the sea Neptune. Transfer from London to Hamburg for passengers and part of the cargo. A new transition to London, where there is only one thing left to boot up here. And then, in a completely incomprehensible way, the captain who went ashore disappears. What if? With Zaid, noiselessly, as she was able to do, Greta came up and hugging her shoulders at once drove away thoughts of all the bad things. Yasha, why are you freezing here? Let's go to the cabin. I'm worried too, but you can wait in the warmth. Of course you can, Yakov agreed, but only. Quite unexpectedly, Uncle Carl emerged from the shroud of fog still hanging over the pier like a ghost and literally flew up the ladder to the deck. Are you waiting? We are waiting. Where have you been for so long? Greta began. We're all ready with Mom. You'll soon find out where you were. Uncle Carl waved away. There were no incidents, Captain Yakov reported. We are not in the vicinity. If you mean the police, then she has been on duty here for 2 hours. They just arrived and are standing there. Which is quite expected, Uncle Carl sighed and said in a sinking voice. Yasha, call your father and both of them to my cabin. We need to talk. We seem to be in trouble, and very seriously. Carl, at least the climate there is not like in Greenland. My father looked questioningly at Uncle Carl, who looked confused and seemed to have aged overnight. No, it's like in Norway. I was there in my youth before the war. You can live. But that's not the point. What will people say about everything when they find out? You and I are as if to us. After all, it was you and I who started everything. Everyone was gathered, but instead of Palestine. And nothing good, my father sighed. But what choice do we have? We've been pinned to the wall. That's right, Ezef is against the wall. Uncle Carl jumped up and ran around the cabin. Yes, in general, during the conversation I got the strong impression that all this is a temporary restriction on entry into Palestine. And this is what Carl told his father in an unquestioning tone. Because first of all, we do not know everything, and Palestine is really not calm and the local Arabs are extremely dissatisfied with the Jewish repatriation. And then we should bow down to the gentlemen of the British for offering us this option. And secondly, even if you are right. So what? What are we going to do? We will send a petition of protest to the Prime Minister or the King himself. I'll tell you where this petition will be sent, or you'll guess it yourself once. Well, if we start making noise, the police are on the dock. And then they will definitely send everyone to Germany together. Do you want to go back to the Third Reich, Carl? I don't want. And that's why when we talk to people, we should not focus on this, but on the fact that we ourselves did not know anything and that everything that happened was a banal twist of fate. Well, we were all unlucky. We were just unlucky, and the British solution offered to us is the best and only correct one. Moreover, the contract is only for 5 years, which is quite divine. Yes, indeed, Yakov mentally agreed divinely. My intuition, which literally screamed about impending troubles, did not deceive me again. Because due to the discontent of the local Arab population, the British authorities were forced to temporarily suspend the repatriation of Jews to Palestine, which was notified by the captain of the steamer Neptune, Carl Fishman, in the office of the shipping company by a representative of the British emigration authorities. But based on the situation with the 300 Jewish repatriates on board the steamer Neptune and understanding their difficult and almost desperate situation, the representative of the British emigration authorities offered everyone to conclude a 5-year contract with the British Navy to work as civilian support personnel for the future British naval base in the Auckland Islands. For those who are weak in geography, 250 miles south of New Zealand. The task is surprisingly simple. To live on the largest of the islands of the Auckland archipelago and provide all possible assistance in the event of ships from Great Britain and its friendly countries entering the islands. And if you consider that the ships of Great Britain and its friendly countries are extremely rare in this area of the Pacific Ocean, then you will have to do a little more than nothing. As they say in Russia, work does not hit a recumbent person. That's exactly what my father agreed when Yakov named another reason why it's still worth signing a contract with Royal Navy. After all, in fact, what happens? We live in our community quietly and peacefully. We catch fish, grow vegetable gardens, and the bank account grows. Anyway, my father paused. I have a feeling that history is starting to repeat itself. What do you mean? Uncle Carl didn't understand. What are you talking about? And about that, my father paused again, that about 300 years ago, one of our ancestors, well, not exactly an ancestor, but a relative on the sidelines, Isaac Stern, caught fire with the idea of creating a Jewish colony in Australia. It was completely uninhabited at that time. He equipped 4 galleons, Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon, and sailed from Hamburg. And as I understand it, they did not reach Australia. Not enough, Carl, not enough, sighed the father. Otherwise, we might be living in a completely different world right now. The last news from them came from Kapstadt, that is, from Cape Town. Well, the fact that they did not reach Australia is not surprising. Uncle Carl brought out his authoritative resume of a professional sailor. The galleon is not a steamer, but the idea was worthwhile. Carl, what are you up to? My father was wary. Nothing yet, but you never know how life might turn out. Uncle Carl smiled for the first time during the conversation. However, he glanced at his watch. We're gathering everyone on the upper deck. What the people will say. And let's hope it doesn't get to the police. Fears about possible dissatisfaction with the presentation of claims to the organizers of the collective relocation to Palestine have not been justified. If the shock of what was happening affected, then it immediately became clear to everyone that it was useless to protest and they should be content with little. But anyway, the police squad on duty at the pier was left without work, and there were no people willing to refuse to sign a contract with the British Navy. And everything went smoothly again. First, an authorized naval officer came on board to process the paperwork. Then, which surprised everyone, the now auxiliary employees of the Royal Navy were paid their due salary 3 months in advance. As explained by the officer who issued the papers for the entire period of the transition of the Neptune from London to the Auckland Islands. Well, as the cherry on the cake, everyone was allowed to go ashore to make purchases of personal belongings and basic necessities necessary for life on the islands of the Auckland archipelago. And so that no one who came ashore would get lost in an unfamiliar city and delay the departure, several large double-decker buses were brought directly to the pier. A miracle, that's all. But anyway, in the afternoon, fully loaded with agricultural equipment for Australian and New Zealand farmers and settled to the very waterline, the Neptune left the Thames estuary into the expanses of the North Sea, heading towards the English Channel. The long-distance sea voyage from London to the Auckland Islands lost in the expanses of the Pacific Ocean has begun. Chapter 2. Raider against Raider. Or, Bludgeon on the Ridge. What's that? The sharp, absorbing crackle of radio interference, which in an instant drowned out all the sounds of the air, unpleasantly hit my ears. The storm must be coming. Yakov, turning down the volume, turned the vernier, and how strong. Interference across all ranges. We need to report to the watch and switch off, otherwise. Suddenly, the door flew open, and Uncle Carl literally flew into the radio room. Connection with St. Helena. Quickly, give it to me. The steamer Neptune. We are under threat of attack by a German submarine. They demand a stop for inspection. Suspicion of transporting slaves. The change in the situation turned out to be so rapid that Yakov literally fell into a stupor from everything that was happening, and then, squeezing out every word, said, "I can't, Captain. There is no connection. Interference on all waves. The storm is coming." A thunderstorm? What kind of thunderstorm? Uncle Carl grabbed the headphones, listened to the broadcast for a couple of seconds, and then said in a peremptory tone, "It's not a thunderstorm. They're jamming the airwaves so we don't call for help. Yasha, follow me." In addition to the watchman, there was also a mate and a boatswain. Control room. Moreover, everyone, with the exception of the helmsman standing at the helm, watched through the side porthole of the port side a submarine running a parallel course, no more than in a cable, with a swastika flag flying over the wheelhouse, clearly indicating the nationality of this predator of the depths. There is no connection. There will be no help. They're jamming the airwaves. The radio telegrapher is a witness. Uncle Carl nodded towards Yakov and after a short pause continued. "Pass the flags. You are understood. We're going to drift. We are ready to receive the inspection party. And we will meet them." "Captain, what do you want?" the XO began. "Yes." Uncle Carl literally roared. "This is a war, and it began in the 33rd. They'll rob us first, then drown us, and the ends will fall into the water. So do it. And if anyone is afraid, then I will answer for everything personally to the British." "Carl, do you need help?" "What is it?" the boatswain asked, a smile playing on his face, more like a predator's grin. "I need it, Izzy." Uncle Carl smiled too. "And get the people off the deck so they don't get in the way." So that's what kind of agricultural machinery is here. Yakov, who was also taken to help, standing near the open door of a cargo container installed on the deck, watched with mixed feelings as the veterans of the Kaiserliche Marine prepared for battle one of the 2 Hotchkiss revolver guns hidden inside. Yes, of course, on the one hand, he like everyone else, signed a contract with Royal Navy to enroll in civilian support personnel, and on the other, the Navy is the Navy, and something like that, in general, was to be expected, but somehow. "Is it scary?" Uncle Carl leaned out of the container. "Not much," Yakov admitted honestly. "Me too, but the main thing here is not to panic, and the rest." He glanced at the submarine, which had already begun to slow down. "So Yasha, as soon as we drift, on my command you open and hold the second door, and Izya and I will stuff them with steel. A submarine is not a battleship, it's enough for our hearts and 7 eyes. And close your ears, or you'll go deaf. Do you understand everything?" "That's it, Herr Captain." "Do it." Meanwhile, events went on as usual, and, fulfilling the requirements of the warship of the Third Reich, the English cargo and passenger steamer Neptune, having stopped the car, drifted, gave up the storm ladder, ready to receive the inspection party. Complete submission to fate, and recognition of the right of the strong, if not for a pair of guns inside a seemingly unremarkable cargo container installed on the upper deck, allowing them to fire on both sides, overnight turning a harmless civilian steamer into a kind of raider capable of sending a much more well-armed and protected to the bottom with a sudden blow of its camouflaged artillery the enemy. Well, what are they pulling there? Yakov was all on pins and needles. They have already drifted, and the boat is being lowered from the submarine. Or something with a gun? And then I heard, "Open up." To open the container door is a second, another half a second to cover your ears. Just in time. The roar of the shot hit even the closed ears rather weakly, and an explosion flashed on the hull of the submarine, in the area of the control room. There is a hit. Another shot, another hit, then another and another. A blinding flash, a terrible roar, and the submarine, broken in two due to an internal explosion, lifting its bow and stern high, disappears underwater in a matter of moments. Yasha, how are you? Did you get caught by the shards? No, it's not hooked. Well, that's good, Uncle Carl smiled. Good luck, they hit the shell cellar. More than enough, the boatswain agreed. Carl, are we going to lower the boat? Absolutely, Izia, absolutely. It is necessary to collect trophies. Maybe something interesting will come up. We must at least try to understand why we are suddenly being hunted like this. Carl, are you? No, Henry, the devil of the sea is on your soul. Uncle Carl grinned like a hungry crocodile. Didn't you expect to meet again like this? I see, I didn't expect it, but in vain. The earth is round, Henry. And the Lord, he sees everything. Well, how do you like the armor piercing in the shell cellar from the Untermensch? Is it impressive? The boat sent to collect trophies unexpectedly found one, although stunned, but alive, among the corpses of the members of the inspection group, who were floating on the water, thanks to their life jackets. And not just anyone, but a former colleague of Uncle Carl, who advised him a little more than 3 months ago to shoot himself by pouring a bullet from the Iron Cross received for the Battle of Jutland. And now, on the deck, with a huge crowd of spectators, an amazing spectacle was unfolding, worthy of the highest praise from theater critics, with the only difference that both actors played themselves in this performance. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you, Uncle Carl pointed at the prisoner. Heinrich is my former colleague, an active officer of the Kriegsmarine, a member of the SS, a pure-blooded Aryan and an ungrateful pig, to whom I saved his life, but he did not even give me his hand at our last meeting, but advised me to make a bullet out of the cross for Jutland, and she, as an Untermensch, shoot herself. And now a pirate. What pirate, Carl? It's you pirates! The prisoner suddenly howled. Resisting a German warship. His sinking from a disguised weapon mounted on board a civilian steamer. What is this? Not piracy? Self-defense, Uncle Carl said with emphasis in his voice. Nobody hid the guns. Deck cargo and cargo containers is the property of the British Navy, as well as much more. And that's all according to the bill of lading. And the fact that we used one of them. Yes, I won't deny it, just like you think, Henry, you won't deny that we weren't the first to open fire on you, but you demanded that we stop at gunpoint and take an inspection party. Supposedly we have slaves on board. You would also accuse us of smuggling live mammoths. And what they didn't have to do at all was jam the air, they immediately gave themselves away. But we got distracted. Uncle Carl looked the prisoner straight in the eyes. Even though you offended me a lot then, Henry, but I will not settle accounts. If you tell the truth, who ordered us to be robbed and sunk, you will live. I'll hand you over to the British. If not, I'll have them strung up on a cargo boom like a pirate on a yard. Choose. There was no order to rob, the prisoner said in a sinking voice. Just sink it, to torpedo, and so that no one survives. I don't know whose order it is. And with the robbery, the captain's idea was. He heard from his friend the customs officer that the Jews, when leaving, were trying to smuggle gold, so he decided. Creative execution of an order, Uncle Carl commented. That's right, what's the good of disappearing? It's better to divide among ourselves, fraternally, than to go to the bottom. And the ocean, it's big, who knows? But about the gold, Henry, your captain miscalculated. We don't have any gold, not at all, not a grain. I don't know how it was with others, but we just didn't get skinned before we left. What else can you say? No. But, Carl, you promised. I promised I would, but I'm sorry, Henry, but you'll have to stay under lock and key all the way to New Zealand, and there's no other way. But it did not work out to transfer to the British counterintelligence the only survivor of the crew of the destroyed pirate submarine, because after a couple of hours he died quietly, while under guard, in one of the cabins. And the autopsy showed that the cause of death was not a concussion received during the explosion of the submarine, but an ordinary heart attack. Listen, Azef, of course, I have no doubt about your diagnosis and I will attach a medical conclusion to the report in all its form, but for a submariner to suffer from a simple heart attack? The conversation took place in a narrow circle, in the captain's cabin, over a mug of fragrant Bavarian shortly after the fleeting funeral of the prisoner, whose corpse, banally, was thrown overboard without any funeral rite, as befits a pirate. Not simple, Carl, but caused by strong emotional feelings. Remember yourself. How did it feel when your colleague, whose life you saved, muddied you? I haven't slept all night, Uncle Carl said honestly. Here it is the same, with the only difference that he and his kind do not consider us to be people at all, and according to their ideas it was not even a robbery, but just to take their own. And for them, instead of gold, a club on the spine. And most importantly, from whom? Yes, here perhaps. Azef, you're right, Uncle Carl agreed. Any heart attack is enough, because it almost turned out according to Lermontov. How is it with him? The poet's soul couldn't stand it, suggested Yakov. That's right, Yasha, you can't say more precisely, and although Henry was never a poet. And right now, Carl, that's what worries me the most, the bosun chimed in. Why are we being hunted? The interception by a submarine of a foreign cargo and passenger steamer in peacetime with a categorical order to sink it, leaving no trace. And why? To send 300 Jews to the bottom? I'm sorry, I don't believe it. As well as the fact that all this is due to the fact that one of our people spat in beer to this twitchy corporal before sailing. Did you spit in the beer? There was a momentary pause, after which everyone present literally choked on laughter. Well, you have a version, Isya, although I wouldn't refuse that, Uncle Carl finally said, stopping laughing. But seriously, we don't have any special cargo on board, if that's what you mean, except for ourselves. Ourselves? What do you mean, Carl? The bosun did not understand. Explain it. I'll explain. Of course this is only my version, but... Uncle Carl was silent for a while, collecting his thoughts. It is very consistent with the whole logic of events. To begin with, back in England, when we were all offered a contract with the Royal Navy to sign, it seemed very strange to me. After all, we are, in fact, foreigners, even if we are future residents of the mandated British territory. Did the counterintelligence check on us? Yes, the contract is for civilian support personnel, but for the Navy, of course, the military. But she should have The bosun agreed, almost choking on beer from such a revelation. If only the British, he tried to grab at straws. I don't know, Uncle Carl shrugged. Maybe so, but it's doubtful. These are not the days of the sailing fleet, when sailors were recruited from various kinds of drunks in pubs. But that's not the strangest thing. And the contract? To provide all possible assistance to the ships of Great Britain and its friendly countries. But which one? There are no specifics. But in order to perform any, even the simplest ship maintenance work, specialists are needed. Do we have many of them, not counting the crew? You can count on the fingers of one hand. And the contract was offered to everyone without exception. For humane reasons? Uncle Carl gulped down the rest of the beer in his mug. So Isya, I wasn't born yesterday, and I know what's what in life. The British would not, even with the best intentions, take incompetence into the Navy. They could, for example, send those who did not suit them to India or some other colony, since Palestine is still closed. And what do you suppose, Carl? The bosun was wary. That's it, Uncle Carl said in an admonitory tone. What if we take into account the presence in the contract of only two absolutely clear conditions, the term and place of service, and also a very good salary, which should be paid not to auxiliary civilian personnel, but to the personnel of the fleet? Then this whole naval base, to which the British have assigned us to serve, will consist only of ourselves. Yes, ourselves, with a very simple task. To prevent enemy raiders from entering the Auckland Islands in wartime. The British are preparing for a new war with Germany. And you Emden, and other similar raiders remember. What did they do during the last war? And now it won't work out that way to settle down near some uninhabited island in a quiet cove. The British will settle all the islands just like us. And they benefit, and we have a place to live while Palestine is closed. That's why the weapons were immediately issued, so that they would not be delivered in a hurry. And there are plenty of former infantrymen and gunners among the passengers. Well, the fact that none of us will go over to the German side is, you know, clear without any counterintelligence. It makes sense, the bosun had agreed. Only, Carl, it is unclear why it was necessary to send a submarine to intercept, if the Abwehr even got wind of all these plans of the British. Well, they would have sunk us, so what? There would be no other willing people, including Jews. There would be a lot, Uncle Carl agreed. Only here, as I understand it, easier, politics. This, as you correctly said, twitchy corporal could not survive such a thing that we Jews, although so far with the help of the British, began to show his teeth. Here, Azef, he told me a lot about his youth in Russia, about how he was in the Jewish self-defense unit. A useful experience. Well, wow. Yakov looked at his father in surprise. But there's not a word about it at home, not half a word. Useful, but not the most pleasant, my father sighed, catching Yakov's surprised look. Have you ever wondered, son, why we ended up outside the pale of settlement in Arkhangelsk? What are we going to do, Carl? The boatswain reminded of the mortal reality. After all, if they send a second boat. They won't, Uncle Carl said with absolute certainty in his voice. The ocean is big, and it's not so easy to find us. Firstly, secondly, Germany does not have so many submarines, and thirdly, after such a shameful failure due to ordinary greed, you really have to be out of your mind. A pirate attack by a German submarine on a peaceful English steamer with Jewish emigrants, consider them refugees. A loud international scandal is guaranteed. And St. Helena already knows. Yasha sent the cipher message. True, of course, it is not yet a fact that the British will want to make public everything that happened, but anyway, we provided them with a couple of extra points in politics. Let's hope that they won't forget us either. Listen, Carl, do we have anything else besides 2 guns? The bosun looked questioningly at Uncle Carl. Or maybe he paused. No, Isya, it's not a secret anymore, Uncle Carl smiled. It was all a secret until today, but now I don't see the point in hiding it. In addition to the guns, there are 50 Springfield 19.3 rifles and a pair of Lewis machine guns. Everything is new, in oil. According to the bill of lading, as well as the guns are the property of the British Navy. It is intended to arm the guards of the future naval base. How are the cartridges? 1,000 boxes, the bosun summed up solidly, there's not enough for one fight. What's in the big container at the stern? Yakov asked, who had been curious for a long time. It was too strange, unlike the others, obviously made to transport something specific. Is it an armored car, by any chance, or even 2? Suggested the father, who had finished with another mug of beer. The dimensions allow. No, Izef, I didn't guess. The deck will not withstand such a heavy load. There, Uncle Carl winked slyly at Yakov, is a reconnaissance hydroplane? A seaplane scout? Yakov was extremely surprised. And he thought that he had said goodbye to the sky for a long time. After all, if one could still hope to find something similar to an aero club in Palestine, then in the Auckland Islands. And here's such luck. However, of course, it is not yet a fact that he will be allowed to fly on a reconnaissance plane. He's not a Royal Air Force pilot. But on the other hand, there was a reason why, when signing the contract, the recruiting officer asked in all the details, what he flew and how many raids he had. Certainly not for the sake of curiosity, and therefore? And there is gasoline, and oil, and spare parts, and in general, everything you need. Uncle Carl continued in the tone of a snake tempter. I see how the eyes lit up. And since you, Yasha, are the only pilot among us, I think that upon arrival the British will offer you to sign an addendum to the contract. Moreover, according to the bill of lading, this is again not a scout, but a communications aircraft. There is no need to talk about any legal issues. Carl, so maybe, in that case, the British will give us a destroyer for the Coast Guard? The bosun perked up. And what happens? The pilot is in action, the land forces too, they have rifles and cannons with a machine gun, and we are sailors? Well, you're gaping at a destroyer for nothing, is ya? Uncle Carl grinned. Don't forget that we are all civilian support personnel. But it's a worthwhile idea. Even if the British are not thinking about anything like this right now, then they need to be prompted to this idea. However, it's not a destroyer or even a ramboat to ask for, but some kind of fishing vessel. We have a lot of people from the team who went fishing at one time. There are some, the bosun confirmed. And in case of war, a pair of camouflaged guns for the bow and stern of such a fisherman, and a ready hook. That's what I mean, Uncle Carl confirmed. The bosun broke into a smile. And in general, for all the good things. I agree, Uncle Carl nodded. For our future little fleet, for all of us, for all the good things, and also. He suddenly became serious. For the fact that no matter what, a new war still does not happen. Otherwise, the last one will be enough for me for the rest of my life. Chapter 3, Disappeared. Yasha, Wake up! Eh? What? Yakov opened his eyes with difficulty. The cabin was dimly lit by a strip of light coming through the curtained porthole. And he was woken up by the bosun? The dream, as if by hand, was lifted. To send a bosun as a messenger? He's not a sailor? What happened? Hush, you'll wake the others, the bosun whispered. The captain is calling. Get dressed and get into the control room quickly. Yes, Mr. Bosun. Yakov hurriedly began to pull on a sailor's robe, especially since the bosun, having fulfilled the duties of a messenger, for some reason did not leave, but remained waiting, standing in the middle of the cabin, thereby being an additional adjusting factor. But the strangest thing was not even that, but the fact that, judging by the lighting, it had long been morning, if not the first half of the day at all, but there was silence around, like in the dead of night, when only the watch is awake, and the passengers and most of the crew are having their 10th dream. By the way, what time is it? Yakov reached for his watch. It's morning now. The bosun also whispered, without giving a glance at the dial, and immediately, without a pause, continued. Ready? Come on, the captain is waiting. We didn't meet anyone on the way to the control room, which was quite normal for an early morning. Something else was abnormal. The Neptune was lying adrift, and this, if you add the bosun messenger here, who was also the captain's unofficial delegate, suggested certain, not very good thoughts that something non-trivial had happened. But what? Certainly not a car breakdown, or any other accident, Yakov decided after a little thought. Otherwise the bosun would not have been sent for him, limiting himself to a sailor on watch. And then what? Another submarine? No, it doesn't look like the bosun is too calm, or a secret meeting with some British warship, and he is needed to establish communication. It looks like that, unless of course. But anyway, what's to guess, now we'll find out. They entered the control room. Yasha, how are you? Are you okay? Or should I call my father? Uncle Karl looked at Yakov with concern. You look very pale. No need. Yakov shook his head. Let him sleep. You didn't need a doctor. And anyway, you'll turn pale here from such news. The whole world is on the wrong side. Yes, of course, following the bosun into the control room, Yakov assumed that something had happened that did not quite fit into the usual rhythm of life. But to hear, and most importantly, to see such a thing. And the following happened. A little more than half an hour ago, or to be precise, at 1 hour 45 minutes past midnight, right ahead, quite suddenly, as if from nowhere, a strip of dense, rapidly expanding fog appeared. The third mate on watch, assuming that the cause of the fog could be an iceberg that broke off from the glaciers of Antarctica, gave the order to change course. But then the magnetic compass card suddenly spun like a top, and the next moment the whole ship was plunged into darkness, in the literal sense of the word. It was not only the cabin that was de-energized. The lights went out everywhere, including the running lights. But that was just the beginning. While they were trying to figure out what was the matter, along the way listening to terrified reports from the engine room about the lack of emergency lighting, which should not have been in principle, since it is powered by batteries, everything around lit up with a strange, flickering, emerald green light. And the watchman in the control room had the feeling that the Neptune. He found himself in a huge, half-filled tunnel with rotating walls of clouds shining with emerald green light. And then everything disappeared, and the day came. Immediately, abruptly, in an instant. No, the sun has not risen above the horizon. It just shone in the sky. And it's not the only one. In the east, directly ahead, not eclipsed by bright sunlight, a huge moon hung quite high above the horizon, not like the moon, in the phase of the first quarter exceeding the apparent diameter of an ordinary moon by 20 times, and 3 smaller moons were visible near it. Also in the month-to-half disk phase. From a state of prostration from everything that was happening, those in the control room were brought out by a message from the engine room that the lighting was working again. After which the third mate, who finally came to his senses, ordered to drift and wake the captain, who, seeing such an outrage in the surrounding world, in turn, gave the order to call the executive officer and the second to the control room and assistant, as well as a bosun. Following a brief brainstorming session, all those present agreed on only one thing. The large moon is very similar to the planet Jupiter, and the 3 small ones are like Galilean moons. Io, Europa, Ganymede and Callisto. Moreover, one of them either got lost on the way when Jupiter was flying to Earth's orbit, or is in an eclipse, and therefore is not visible. As for everything else, that is, the reasons for what happened, then here. So that's it, Yasha. Uncle Karl paused. Go to the radio room and try to catch at least something. Any news, because he paused again, this doesn't look like anything at all. I'll try. Yakov nodded, and thought to himself, if only after these electrical protuberations the radio station is still intact. But contrary to fears, the radio station turned out to be in working order, but the air was silent. Only radio interference rustled, the echo of distant thunderstorms. Moreover, there were no radio broadcasts on all bands, including shortwaves, where the air is clogged around the clock, and you can hear a radio station broadcasting from the other side of the earth. And here. Okay, Yakov decided, a negative result is also a result. And taking off his headphones, he went to the control room. Well, what? Is there any news? Uncle Carl met him with a question. No way, Herr Captain, the air is empty on all bands. Yakov spread his hands. But we're not empty, Uncle Carl said with a kind of tragic smile. And 2 whole pieces of news. There are 36 feet, 9 meters, under the keel, instead of 3,000, this is the first news, and the second, He took a deep breath. The water overboard is fresh. How fresh is it? Yakov did not understand. Like in a river or lake. There, you can see for yourself. And with these words Uncle Carl pointed with his gaze at the bucket of water standing in the middle of the cabin. As it turned out, while Yakov was trying to catch at least something on the air, the watchman did not waste time in vain and began checking the bridge instruments for their serviceability, which was not at all superfluous, bearing in mind the obscure events that had recently occurred, where all imaginable and unimaginable laws of nature were violated. Strangely enough, everything worked except for the echo sounder, which also seemed to work, but gave out a depth of only 30 feet, which corresponded more to the depth of the Azov or Baltic Seas than to the depth of the ocean off the coast of South Africa, unless, of course, the Neptune accidentally drifted over the top of a seamount, which it could have been too. But anyway, to check the sonar readings, an ordinary lot was lowered overboard, hastily made from a bucket and a piece of cable. The depth turned out to be the same, 30 feet, and the water in the bucket was fresh, which turned out to be completely accidental when one of the sailors who conducted depth measurements, surprised by the presence of particles very similar to river mud at the bottom of the bucket, tasted the water. So we're at the mouth of the Amazon? Yakov was amazed, mechanically recalling from a school geography course one unusual feature of this great South American river, the flow of which is so strong that it pushes the salty ocean water deep into the water for several tens of miles. Yasha, what are you talking about? Uncle Carl stared at Yakov in surprise. What Amazon? We are in South Africa. Or do you want to say, but the bosun, who intervened in the conversation, did not let him finish. That's right, Carl. I do not know how it could have happened, but it explains everything. I mean, the water is fresh and the mud is at the bottom. Amazon, it's wide. About 40 miles, and the water near the mouth is fresh. Remember, you and I visited those parts 2 years ago. You were also surprised. The river is like the ocean, the shores are not visible. I remember, Izzy, I remember, Uncle Carl said with a deep sigh of relief. Now at least something is beginning to clear up. Well done, Yasha. You know geography well. So, in this case, we had to pass over land, if in a straight line. The second mate doubted the possibility of their current location. Not necessarily at all, assuming the displacement of the continents, the exec objected. The southern tip of Africa has moved to the mouth of the Amazon, and we are with it. Or South America. It doesn't matter, Uncle Carl interrupted the XO. The main thing is that now we know at least approximately where we are. And the Earth is close. And how all these miracles happened there, let the big-headed academics figure it out, they get paid for it. Captain, what's the course? The helmsman, who had been silent until that time, reminded of the mortal reality. And you need a lot, otherwise at such depths you can easily run aground. Or shall we go by echo sounder? We'll have to, Uncle Carl said without much enthusiasm in his voice. No one was going to come here. But first we need to determine the location more precisely. Will you order the motorboat to be lowered, Herr Captain? Asked the third mate, who was still on watch. You can of course, but it will take a long time. Uncle Carl said after a moment's thought. Until they reach the shore, until they find the nearest village, until they go back. So you can take it all night. And looking at Yakov, he asked the question that he had been waiting for a long time. Yasha, tell me straight out, if we launch the hydroplane, will you be able to fly to explore? But without excessive heroism. It's an unfamiliar car, you've never flown one like this. I don't want Greta to remain a widow. Well, I don't want to either, Yakov smiled. But I can fly. There will be no risk. I have 200 flight hours, half on a seaplane, you know. The weather is good, almost calm. And the fact that I didn't fly on this particular model is not particularly important. The biplane is very stable, whether are German, English or American. In general, anyone To fall into a tailspin or turn somersaults on landing, a special talent is needed. Okay, fly. Who will you take with you? No one. There will be cargo in the second cabin, Yakov explained. A bag of NZ, a rifle with cartridges and a field radio station in case of an emergency landing. So the rifle and the radio station are from the military cargo. The XO, who has always been distinguished by increased scrupulousness and love to do everything according to the rules, became worried. So was the cannon we used to sink the submarine, Uncle Carl reminded him. But then the British gentleman didn't show much dissatisfaction. So let's hope that there will be no complaints now. And the hydroplane is also not a private cargo. That's it, Yasha, go. Get ready, and let's hope, Uncle Carl paused, that you won't need it. It didn't take long to prepare for the flight. Thanks to the command of the British Navy, which revealed after the incident with the submarine and, as a result, the disclosure of the mystery of the cargo being transported, did not object to Mr. Yakov Stern, who signed a contract to serve in the civilian support staff of Royal Navy and who also has flight training, familiarized himself in detail with the seaplane being transported as cargo. Of course, he's flying it. And this allowed Yakov, as the mechanics say, to sort out the car one by one. And now, flying around the Neptune in a wide circle with a smooth climb, Yakov listened to the engine with satisfaction. It worked smoothly, without failures and howls, humming evenly on takeoff mode. Well, I didn't try in vain. It paid off. Meanwhile, the height grew and grew. 100 meters, 150, 200, 250, 300 meters. And here is the shore. We can assume that I did not fly in vain. That's just. Steering the car towards the shore, Yakov looked at the horizon in surprise. No, it was clearly not the Amazon, which, however, he had never flown over before and had never even been to those parts. But purely geographically. The coast should have stretched from east to west or from west to east, if you look in the direction of the flow of this most full-flowing river in the world. Here, the coast, gently curving to the north and south, went into the distance as far as the eye could see, most of all resembling the coast of a sea bay or a large freshwater lake, into which, from the east, Yakov looked closely. Yes, it is, either flows in, or a fairly wide river flows out. And only in the west, up to the horizon, is the water surface. Definitely not Amazon. And what? Great American Lakes or? Okay, we'll figure it out, Yakov decided, heading for the mouth of the river. His task is to find people. Any settlement, even the tiniest one. Yes, even the hut of a hermit fisherman. And where to look for people, if not along the riverbed, if the coast of this incomprehensible lake is definitely extinct. Yakov kept turning his head, trying to see why, no, not even a steamer or a barge anymore, but at least a fishing boat, well, or an Indian canoe, after all, if this is really the shore of one of the great American lakes. But it was all in vain. Nothing. No one. Meanwhile, the mouth or source of the river was rapidly approaching, and then Yakov saw people, but not on the shore, but on an island that divided the river into two unequal parts. The island was quite large, with high, almost vertical shores and a flat, shrubby peak, on which there were people doing some kind of work. However, they were no longer engaged, but pointing with their hands at the hydroplane flying in their direction. It seems that aviation, given the local wilderness, was a novelty for them, although they were clearly not Indians in their clothes. The Europeans. It's already good, Yakov rejoiced. Maybe someone knows English or even German. What's this? 4 large sailboats were anchored near the shore of the island. But it was not the swift sailing of the sea, clippers and not the multi-masted windjammer barges that from time to time called at the port of Hamburg. And the old ones. Galleons of the 17th century. With a low bow and a high, ornate stern, on the masts of which, Yakov could not believe his eyes, white flags with a blue hexagonal star, the Star of David, were flying. Jews? And then something clicked in Yakov's head, as if something clicked, and he understood everything. They are the disappeared ones. The expedition of his ancestor Isaac Stern, which disappeared in the 17th century during the transition to Australia. But how? 300 years have passed, and they? U-turn, descent, engine on low gas. The floats touch the water. A dinghy is in full swing from the shore, to the hydroplane that has been brought down and is already being carried downstream. There are people in 17th century clothes, and on the high carved stern of the galleons the names Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon shine in gold. That's how it was, Yakov finished the story. And there was silence, broken only by the barely audible hiss of a working radio station, and the buzzing of ubiquitous insects. And the people? People were silent, trying, as on that very first day in this world, to accept and realize what had happened. After all, to think that their descendants came to them, living 3 centuries later with all their amazing things and knowledge, to live side by side now. And then? But Isaac Stern did not allow himself to dwell on what had happened for a long time, taking control of the situation in his usual, unobtrusive manner. All current work is cancelled for today, he said. We are meeting our future colonist brothers. But we don't have a pilot or a pilot. How much sediment does the Neptune have? I'll clarify now. Yakov bent over the radio station. 20 feet, Mr. Stern. They will pass, Abraham Van Wyden stated. 30 to 40 feet in the fairway. Well, that's great, Isaac Stern smiled. Let's start. Herr Van Wyden, you're in charge. And the work began. Fortunately, there was everything necessary among the cargo of the galleons, and some experience was also present since the time of the call on Tristan da Cunha, and therefore they managed quite quickly. Much faster than it took the Neptune, running at low speed under the echo sounder, to reach the shore. And here I had to suffer a little, in the sense that there is nothing worse than waiting, because everyone was understandably terribly curious. An ornithopter, called a hydroplane, has been seen. The work of the radio station was observed. With a multi-shot rifle, the Springfield 1903, the colony's best marksman, Marine Commander Aaron Yeager, was able to hit a bull's head-sized target from 2,000 feet, 5 times out of 5. And also the Moser wristwatch, which literally delighted Goldfinger the watchmaker. And an electric flashlight and a gasoline lighter.